Answer: a careful study of these verses will show that Paul has only one day in mind, the day of the Lord, which comes as a thief. Actually, the undeniable and irrefutable proof that the mention of the day in verse 2 and 4 is only one day, the day of the Lord, and which does comes as a thief, is contained in the two verses themselves. If indeed Paul wanted us to understand these as two different days, then the phrase, that the day, a different day, the secret rapture, may be overtaking you as a thief, is absolutely meaningless and out of place in this context. I am really at a loss to understand how the use of the word day twice in so many sentences makes them two different days. If these sentences were found in any literature other than the Bible, there would be no mistaking them to mean two different days. It is stated that the differences in the use of the word day twice is easy to see. One comes as a thief in the night, and the other does not overtake as a thief. But if these are two different days, then this comparison is totally incoherent. It would be like comparing apples with oranges. It could be coherently argued, though not scripturally, if the mention of the day twice in these two verses were presented as being two different days for the following reasons. 1. One day comes as a thief in the night, and the other day does not come as a thief. Apples, apples. Or 2. One day overtakes the saints, and the other day does not overtake the saints. Oranges, oranges. But they cannot use those two statements, which would prove them to be different days, because the scriptures do not make any such comparison as the above two statements. So they are forced to concoct the following incoherent contrast. One day comes as a thief in the night, and the other day does not overtake as a thief. Apples, oranges. We must not try to compare apples with oranges, not on the farm, and certainly not in the scriptures. The phrase that comes as a thief, but does not overtake as a thief must of necessity refer to the same day. It is silly to try and use these two phrases as proof of two different days. The two phrases prove just the opposite. They prove absolutely that they are the same day. Can anyone believe that what Paul really meant to say was something like this? The day of the Lord is as a thief in the night, thus is it coming. Now you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day, that is, a different day, the day on which Christ comes to resurrect you, which does not come as a thief in the night, but is a different day from the day of the Lord, which, as you know, does come as a thief in the night. However, even if the rapture were to come as a thief in the night, may be overtaking you as a thief in the night, such a statement would be a little outlandish. The sentence structure and grammar of Paul's statements are clear to understand. The phrase, of the Lord, is understood in the second mention of the day. Just as millions of times in literature, the second mention of something is shortened, or many times even abbreviated for brevity's sake, from all the adjectives and embellishments that the first mention of a particular thing may have. This is quite easy to understand. Look at the description of the very day we are discussing, the day that Christ returns in anger and vengeance, the day of the Lord. This day is described as the unveiling of the Lord from heaven, with powerful messengers, in flaming fire, dealing out vengeance, coming to be glorified, to be marveled at in all. 2 Thessalonians 1 verses 7 to 10. Now when Paul wants to refer back to this day, seeing that our testimony to you was believed, verse 10, he does not again go through several lines of material describing the day he wants to make reference to. He merely states, in that day, verse 10. In that day is not referring to a different day than the day of Christ's unveiling mentioned above. And so, likewise, we have an example of that very thing in these verses. The day of the Lord is as a thief in the night. You, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day of the Lord may be overtaking you as a thief. Why complicate something so simple? Here then is absolute scriptural proof that the mention of the day in verse 2 and the day in verse 4 both come as a thief, and hence are the same day, the day of the Lord. Whether the Thessalonians are in darkness or not in darkness is not the determining factor as to whether or not the second mention of the day in verse 4 comes as a thief or does not come as a thief. The element of the thief is already clearly stated in both verses. Let's read them. The day of the Lord is as a thief. 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 2. That the day may be overtaking you as a thief. 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 4. We can't remove the thief from verse 4 just because its removal would help support a secret rapture theory. Why does this day not overtake the Thessalonians as a thief? Does this scripture tell us that the reason it doesn't overtake them is because it doesn't even come as a thief in the first place? Where do these scriptures say or even suggest such a thing? This scripture plainly tells us why this day doesn't overtake the Thessalonians as a thief. The reason this day, which does come as a thief verse 4, but does not overtake them as a thief, is because you brethren are not in darkness. However, if the Thessalonians were in darkness, then the day of verse 4 would overtake them as a thief. It could not overtake them or anyone else if it didn't come as a thief in the first place. There it is. It is not whether or not the Thessalonians are in darkness or not that determines whether the day comes as a thief or not. No, it does come as a thief. The point Paul is making is that it does not overtake them as a thief, and the reason it doesn't is plainly given: you brethren are not in darkness. That, dear reader, is the only reason that this day, the same day as verse 2, which also comes as a thief, does not overtake the Thessalonians. They are not in darkness. So therefore, this day, the day of verse 4, the so-called rapture day of the Gentile saints, will overtake anyone who is in darkness, and the reason given is that it too, like the day in verse 2, does come as a thief. There is absolutely no way around the simple truth of this scripture. Now, how many different prophetic days are mentioned a dozen times in the scriptures, and are said to come as a thief in the night? Only one, the day of the Lord. Thus the scripture misused to try and support a secret rapture theory, in reality, proves just the opposite. Now notice one thing more. Although the day of the Lord does not overtake them as a thief as it would if they were in darkness, they are, nonetheless, still present at the time of the day of the Lord and have not been raptured away. Whoever the saints are at the time of the day of the Lord, they are still present on earth and have not as yet been raptured or resurrected. Although the day of the Lord does not overtake the saints as a thief, it nonetheless does come as a thief, and no one is resurrected before it comes.
5. A careful examination of the expression the day of the Lord will show that it includes the tribulation.
Answer: a careful examination of the scriptures will show that the day of the Lord does not include the tribulation or the great tribulation. The day of the Lord and the tribulation are different terms, and the scriptures do separate them. They are not overlapping events, as we shall clearly see. Here then is proof that the day of the Lord does not include the great tribulation, as translated in the Authorized Version, or the great affliction, as translated in the Concordant Version. This time of great tribulation or great affliction, Jacob's trouble, 30:7, is so great that we are told that such an event will occur only once in the history of the world, Matt 2400 hours 21. Therefore, it is impossible that there can be two such events, only one can be of the greatest magnitude ever. Is it therefore possible that this event is a part of the great day of the Lord, as suggested by rapture defenders? No, it is not. Here's the proof. Proof for when the day of the Lord will come. Let us be clear that the day of the Lord is the time period of Christ's return to this earth to punish Babylon the Great and to pour out his righteous indignation on her, and on those nations who follow and worship her, for her evil crimes of inhumanity and blasphemy. Here is the order of events, Matt 24:29-30. It's as simple as 1, 2, 3. Immediately after the affliction, great affliction, or great tribulation, ver. 29, of those days. The sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not be giving her beams, and the stars shall be falling from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Mankind in heaven, And then all the tribes of the land shall grieve, and they shall see the Son of Mankind coming on the clouds of heaven with power and much glory. The day of the Lord, the day that the Lord comes, clearly is after the great affliction, and after the heavenly signs. The book of Joel gives us a second confirmation. Alas! Alas! Alas for the day! For near is the day of the Lord. And as devastation from him who suffices is it coming, Joel 1 verse 15. For coming is the day of the Lord. A day of darkness and gloominess. A day of clouds and murkiness, Joel 2 verse 2. The heavens quake, the sun and the moon are somber, and the stars gather in their brightness, before his army, Revelation 19 verse 11, Joel 2 verse 10. And he will spare his people, 2:18. And I will give miracles in the heavens above, and signs on the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood, 2:30-31, before the coming of the day of the Lord, the great and fearful day, 2:30-31. So we have this event neatly bookended with references to the great affliction and the heavenly signs. Matt 24:29 clearly tells us that, immediately after the great affliction or tribulation of those days, the signs in the sun, moon, and stars occur, followed by the return of Christ, the day of the Lord. And Joel 2 verse 31 clearly tells us that the signs in the heavens occur before the coming of the day of the Lord. As to the chronology of these grand events, there can be no honest dispute. The day of the Lord does not include the Great Tribulation, but comes after the Great Tribulation, and after the heavenly signs. Day of the Lord comes as a thief.
6. The tribulation is, in its beginning stages, a time of darkness and gloom, this being comparable in its arrival to a thief in the night, and from the tape we have this statement. Now I think that the significance of this thief here is not so much the suddenness, or not so much the secretiveness of it, but the gloom and the darkness, and the negative associations, where the judgment is poured out, and the wrath, because you notice that the figures he uses here are light verse 5, and day again, and then in verse 6 and 7, watching and sober, not drunk. You see, these are the qualities of the day of our expectation. So the ones as I see it, the ones that Paul is addressing, are in a different kind of a day as their expectation. The day when they are snatched away together in clouds, has nothing to do with this day of the Lord coming as a thief in the night. What is the principal point of the figure of the thief in relation to the day of the Lord? What is the point of likeness in the figure of speech? Since we all know there are differences, but what is the point of likeness in the figure of the thief in relation to the day of the Lord? It would appear from Revelation 3 that perhaps you are right, that this is picturing the unexpectedness of Christ's return, that is his arrival being a surprise. But if that is so, then we conclude that those who are watching will not be surprised by his arrival. Yet Matt 24:44 suggests that even if they are ready, such an hour as you think not the Son of Man comes. I maintain that that figure of the thief, the likeness that is being presented to us, is referring to the ominous qualities of the day of the Lord, that is the portent, or predicting of the time of evil, the ominous qualities of the day of the Lord,